Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories as... Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I post videos just like this one all of the time. Sorry for this video being a few days late. I did have my birthday over the weekend, so I didn't get around to beginning the recording and editing and everything for this video until Monday. And of course it takes me a little bit of time to actually make the video. If you want to get me something for my birthday, you certainly don't have to. But if you'd like to, dropping a like on this video would mean a lot to me. I know I probably shouldn't use my birthday to try and get likes, but I only get like one of those a year, so it's probably okay. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. People like to think the life of a high-end escort is glamorous. Luxury hotels, expensive dinners, inviolable vacations, men who worship you with gifts. And sure, sometimes it is. But it's also a world where power is currency, and the men who have it are often darker than anyone realizes. I've met politicians, tech billionaires, and heirs to empires, but none of them unnerved me like him. Anton von Teufel, the kind of man who only exists in myths and nightmares. It started with a phone call from an agency. My handler, Veronica, sounded nervous, which wasn't like her. "This one's different," she said, her voice taut. "Old money, real old. You'll meet him at his estate. No public venues, no hotels." "Why me?" I asked, more curious than worried. "He requested you specifically." That wasn't unusual. I had a reputation for being discreet and professional, but there was something in her tone, an edge that unsettled me. The estate was a 2-hour drive from the city, buried deep in the woods. The directions wound through narrow, unmarked roads that twisted like veins. The trees were dense, their shadows so thick they seemed alive. By the time I reached the gates, the sun was setting, casting the mansion in hues of deep orange and crimson. The gates creaked open on their own, and the driveway stretched endlessly toward a mansion that looked more like a Gothic cathedral. Its towering spires seemed to scrape the sky, and the windows glowed faintly, as though the house itself was breathing. A man in a black suit greeted me at the door. His face was pale and gaunt, his expression void of warmth. He didn't introduce himself, just motioned for me to follow. The house was cavernous, the air heavy with the faint scent of roses and something else I couldn't place. Something metallic, like blood. Anton was waiting in the library, sitting in an enormous leather chair by the fire. He was older than I expected, mid-50s maybe, but handsome in that weathered, aristocratic way. His salt and pepper hair was swept back, and his tailored suit hugged his frame like it had been sewn onto him. His presence was magnetic, the kind that made it hard to look away. "You're even more exquisite than I was told," he said, his voice smooth and deliberate. "Thank you," I replied, slipping into my professional charm. He didn't touch me, didn't move closer. He just studied me, his eyes sharp and unrelenting, like he was memorizing every detail of my face. "Do you like games?" he asked suddenly. "Depends on the game." His lips curled into a thin smile. "Good. I like a woman with an adventurous spirit." That was our first meeting. He didn't ask for anything physical, just talked. His words were strange, full of riddles and half-truths. He spoke of beauty and power, of how true worth lay in what couldn't be seen. When I left that night, he handed me an envelope. Inside was $50,000. I should have walked away. Something about him set my nerves on edge, but the money was too good. Over the next few weeks, I visited him several more times. Each time was the same. Cryptic conversations, no touching, and another envelope of cash. Then one night he asked me to stay. "It's late," he said, pouring me a glass of wine from a crystal decanter. The liquid shimmered in the firelight like molten rubies. "Why not spend the night? I have a guest room prepared for you." I hesitated, but the wine was already in my hand, and his gaze made it hard to say no. "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. The room was beautiful but cold, decorated in rich velvets and dark woods. The bed was massive, draped in crimson silk that looked untouched. I locked the door and climbed into bed, but sleep wouldn't come. At around 3 a.m. I heard it. Faint footsteps in the hallway, followed by a low, guttural noise that didn't sound human. My skin prickled, every instinct screaming at me to stay still. The noise grew louder, joined by a soft scraping, like nails on wood. It was coming from the other side of the door. "Hello?" My voice cracked as I whispered. The scraping stopped. For a moment there was silence. Then a voice, low and distorted, like it was being dragged from a deep well. "Let me in." I froze, my breath hitching. The voice came again, more insistent. "Let me in." The doorknob rattled violently, the sound echoing in the silent room. I grabbed a lamp from the bedside table and held it like a weapon, my knuckles white. The rattling stopped abruptly. Then came the sound of footsteps retreating down the hall. When morning came, I found Anton waiting for me in the dining room, his smile as sharp as ever. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, sipping his coffee. I stared at him, trying to read his expression. "What was that last night?" "What was what?" he asked, his tone as smooth as the marble floor. "The noise outside my door. The voice." He set his cup down and leaned forward, his eyes glinting like a predator's. "You must have been dreaming." I knew he was lying, but I didn't press him. I just wanted to get out of that house. As I was leaving, he handed me another envelope. "One last thing," he said. "I'd like to show you my collection sometime. I think you'd appreciate it." I didn't respond, but curiosity got the better of me. A week later, I agreed to see it. He led me down a narrow staircase to a locked door. The air grew colder with each step, and my stomach churned with unease. "What's in there?" I asked, my voice trembling. He smiled, the kind of smile that made you want to run. "Beauty, preserved forever." When he opened the door, the smell hit me first. Chemical and cloying. The room was lined with glass cases, each one containing a figure so lifelike I thought they were mannequins at first. Then I looked closer. The eyes were too real, their expressions frozen in terror. "You see," Anton said, his voice soft, "true beauty transcends life. It becomes eternal." I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. "You're insane," I whispered. He stepped closer, his smile widening. "You're perfect, you know. You'd make a fine addition." I ran. I didn't even know how I managed to make it out of that house. My memory of the escape is a jumbled haze of blind panic, my heart thundering in my chest as I fled through vast halls. The walls seemed to close in on me, the air growing thicker, suffocating. My heels clattered against the marble floors, the sound echoing like gunshots in the stillness. I could feel Anton's eyes on me, though I never dared look back. His voice followed me, low and calm, as if he didn't even need to chase me to catch me. "You can't outrun beauty, my dear," he called out. It has already claimed you. When I finally burst through the front doors, the cold night air hit me like a slap, and I nearly stumbled down the steps. The estate's grounds were a labyrinth of shadows and looming trees, but I didn't care where I was running as long as it was away from that house. The forest swallowed me. Branches clawed at my skin and hair, the scent of damp earth filling my nose as I stumbled and tripped over roots and stones. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I kept going until the mansion's eerie glow was nothing but a distant memory. I didn't stop until I reached my car, parked by the estate's wrought iron gates. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before finally jamming one into the ignition. The engine roared to life and I peeled away from that place, my tires screeching against the gravel. But even as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The shadows outside the car seemed too dark, too dense, as if they were alive and watching. By the time I reached the city, I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the wheel. I checked into the first motel I saw, a dingy place with flickering neon lights, and barricaded myself in the room. I didn't bother with the bed. I sat on the floor in the corner, clutching the lamp from the nightstand like it could protect me. Hours passed. My mind raced with images of Anton's collection. The frozen faces locked in glass cases, their eyes pleading for release. I thought about his words. Beauty, preserved forever. I wanted to tell myself it was some elaborate nightmare, but the smell of those chemicals, the glint of terror in their eyes, was too vivid, too real. Then, just as I was starting to think I might be safe, I heard it. A soft knock at the door. My heart stopped. Knock, knock, knock. "Who's there?" My voice cracked as I shouted, though deep down I didn't want an answer. Silence. I crept toward the door, pressing my ear against the cheap wood. My pulse thundered in my ears as I peered through the peephole. Nothing. I exhaled shakily, backing away. Maybe it was just my imagination, paranoia playing tricks on me. Then I heard it again. Scrape, scrape. The sound of something sharp dragging along the floor. "Let me in." The voice was low and distorted, the same one I'd heard outside my room at Anton's estate. My knees buckled and I dropped to the floor, clutching my mouth to keep from screaming. The doorknob rattled violently as though someone or something was trying to force it open. "Let me in," the voice repeated, more insistent this time. I scrambled backward, my body trembling. "Go away," I shouted, but my voice sounded small, powerless. The rattling stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. My breaths came in shallow gasps, my ears straining for any sound. Then, slowly, the door creaked. The lock hadn't turned, but the door was opening anyway, inch by agonizing inch. Beyond it was darkness, thick and impenetrable, like the void itself was staring back at me. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, paralyzed by fear as a shadow began to spill into the room, twisting and writhing like smoke. "You can't run from me," the voice said, now clearer and closer, reverberating inside my skull. The shadow stretched toward me, and I felt its coldness wrap around my legs, dragging me forward. I clawed at the floor, my nails splintering against the cheap carpet, but it was no use. The darkness consumed everything it touched, swallowing the walls, the furniture, the light. The last thing I saw was my reflection in the cracked motel mirror. My face looked different, distorted, wrong. My eyes weren't mine anymore. They were hollow, lifeless, the same as the figures in Anton's collection. And then the world went black. When I woke up, I was back in the mansion, but I wasn't in my body. I was inside the glass. I could see everything. The room, the cases, the other faces staring back at me, their mouths frozen in silent screams. I tried to scream too, but no sound came out. My body wouldn't move. I was trapped, a prisoner in my own reflection. And somewhere in the distance, I heard Anton's voice, calm and unhurried. Welcome to the collection. I never should have opened that email. It came late one night, buried in the sea of spam clogging my inbox. The subject line was simple: play the game, win the prize. I don't know what possessed me to click it. Maybe I was bored, or maybe the insomnia had scrambled my brain. Either way, I clicked. The email had no text, just a link. Against every ounce of common sense, I hovered over it, hesitating only a second before checking. My browser opened to a black screen with a single line of text. Welcome to the game. Will you play? Yes/no. I stared at it, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. It had to be a prank or some kind of viral marketing stunt. I typed yes and hit enter. The screen flickered, the new text appeared. The rules are simple. Do what we ask. No questions, no quitting. Win and you'll receive a reward beyond your wildest dreams. Lose and, well, you won't. A countdown started in the corner of the screen. 30 seconds. Underneath, a new message appeared. Level 1. Knock on your neighbor's door. I laughed. What is this? A weird scavenger hunt? My neighbor, Mrs. Klein, was a sweet old lady who baked cookies for the whole block. I figured I'd humor the game and give her a laugh. I grabbed my phone and walked next door. The house was dark, but I knocked lightly anyway. No answer. I tried again, harder this time. Still nothing. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed. We didn't say lightly, knock harder. I froze, staring at the screen. How did they know? Heart pounding, I raised my fist and pounded on the door. This time the lights flickered on and Mrs. Klein opened the door, looking confused but unharmed. I mumbled an apology about a prank and rushed back to my house. My computer dinged. Well done. Level 2. Leave your front door unlocked for the next hour. This time I hesitated. My neighborhood wasn't exactly crime-ridden, but leaving my door open at night? No way. I hovered over the browser's close button, but the screen glitched and froze. My phone buzzed again. No quitting. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door. Then I sat on the couch, staring at it for what felt like forever. Nothing happened. No shadows moved across the porch. No footsteps crept up the stairs. Just silence. When the hour was up, my computer dinged again. Good. Level 3. Look under your bed. A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't looked under my bed in years. Not since I was a kid and convinced monsters lived there. It was ridiculous, I told myself. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my neck. I grabbed a flashlight and knelt on the floor, shining it into the darkness under my bed. At first, I saw nothing but a few stray socks and some dust. Then something moved. It was quick, just a flash of pale skin and fingers too long to be human. I jerked back, heart pounding. But when I looked again, it was gone. My computer dinged. Did you see it? Level 4. Invited out. I slammed my laptop shut, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Whatever this game was, it wasn't a joke. But it wasn't over. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a message, it was a video. The shaky footage showed my bedroom, filmed from the corner near the ceiling. The camera zoomed in on the bed and slowly something crawled out from underneath it. The thing was impossibly thin, its limbs bending in ways they shouldn't. Its face was a blank, pale expanse with no eyes, no mouth, nothing but smooth, featureless skin. It tilted its head toward the camera as if it knew I was watching. The video ended. A new message appeared on my phone. Level 5. It's inside now. Hide. The sound of footsteps echoed from upstairs. I didn't think. I grabbed my keys and bolted out the front door, sprinting down the street as fast as I could. Behind me, I swear I heard the sound of laughter. Low, guttural, and wrong. I spent the night in my car, parked in a well-lit gas station. When I finally returned home the next morning, the house was empty. My computer was gone. My phone, too. It was like the game had never existed. But I know it did. Because sometimes late at night, I hear those footsteps again. And I wonder if I ever really stopped playing. My boyfriend and his roommates don't understand the privilege of not having to lock their door. When I come to visit, it's like they experience culture shock when they try to barge in and they find it's locked. None of them even carry keys. I once accidentally locked one of his roommates out for the night and he had to walk to a friend's and sleep there. They never got mad at me for it. They all understood why it was a habit I wasn't willing to break. My boyfriend and I were long distance. Since I worked from home and he and his roommates were out of the house for the majority of the day, I would come and stay for a week at a time. They all worked Saturdays, but I had weekends off. So I was laying in my boyfriend's bed in the room closest to the front door, having locked it, and snuggled back in to relax until I felt like getting ready for the day. The apartment complex they lived in comprised of buildings that connected, but had separate staircases and entrances pertaining to that section of apartments. My boyfriend's apartment was all the way at the top left of the last building, nearest to the woods. It was in a nice neighborhood in the suburbs of two busy metropolitan areas. The front doors of the building were never locked. The residents didn't even pretend that they were locked. They would even leave them propped open with large rocks for most of the day and night. On the occasions the door wasn't propped open, when someone came into the building it would slam loudly before bouncing back to an ajar position. My boyfriend always told me to never answer the door, especially if I was alone. On this morning, about an hour after the guys had left, I was reading a Tumblr post on my phone when I heard the door slam and what I swore was a cry for help. I sat upright in bed and listened again, sure that I had gotten it wrong. I was prone to anxiety, diagnosed OCD, and knew I could let my thoughts twist and turn into the worst-case scenarios that frequently went beyond realistic. As I listened, there were no more cries, but it sounded as though someone was laboriously attempting to climb the stairs. There were 2 flights between the entrance and my boyfriend's front door. As the sounds of fumbling footsteps, high-pitched panting and grunting and palms on concrete neared the door, I heard another cry for help, and I knew for certain I heard it this time. Instead of concern, my blood ran thick with fear at the sound. Something about it seemed off. Wrong. I quietly crept out of bed and neared closer to his bedroom door. I heard the woman clamber to the top of the steps and cry for help again. Instead of going for my boyfriend's front door directly to her left, I heard the woman start pounding on the door of the person across the landing. Guiltily, I felt relieved. There were only 2 doors between my boyfriend's and the person across from him, After having tried the two in the middle, the woman finally came pounding on the front door. I gasped and jumped, and my hands flew up to cover my mouth. I pushed my boyfriend's, thankfully silent, bedroom door open and peered into the hallway. I weighed the risk of checking the peephole, for I knew if she noticed a shadow, she'd know I was in there ignoring her. Also, I was scared of what I would find on the other side of the door. To my further shock and horror, the door handle started to jiggle as well. The pounding was frantic and louder and longer than she had done on the other neighbors' doors. I gathered all my courage and took careful steps toward the entryway. I tried my best to make no noise, even though I doubt she'd hear me over her violent knocks. Once I was close enough that I was confident I could check the peephole, whilst also not casting a shadow under the door, I leaned forward and squinted into the tiny glass circle. My mouth went dry and I had to suppress a scream-turned cough. Standing unnecessarily close to the peephole was a man, a grown, disheveled beard, cracked lips, runny nose, crazy-eyed man. I cursed myself for leaving my phone in the bed when all of a sudden the noise stopped. I was paralyzed in my spot. I waited to hear him give up and walk away, but he never did. I wanted to sprint and grab my phone to call 911, but was scared he would break down the door if he heard me. With nothing else to do, my morbid curiosity and flight instinct propelled me to look back into the peephole. He was just standing there, breathing heavily at a high pitch with a wide, delirious smile on his face. Some of his lips started bleeding from a crack being split open again. He barely had any teeth, and the ones he did have were either completely black or a combination of brown and dark green. He took a large inhale through his nose, and his eyes rolled in his head. "Why won't you help me?" he cried out in that near-perfect impression of a woman's voice. It took every ounce of my self-control and patience to let me go back to my boyfriend's room at a pace that didn't expose me. Once inside, I hurried across the carpet to sift through the sheets and blankets for my phone. Once I had it in my hands, I immediately moved to call 911, but a different idea popped into my head last minute. With swift fingertips, I searched "man angry, someone at door audio." I turned down my volume so only I could hear and quickly sifted through my options. Having chosen one I hoped would work, I went back and held my phone through the doorway and into the hall, volume on full blast. Who the hell is pounding down my door at this hour? They must be crazy. You know what? Let me grab my gun so we can both say good morning. There was the sound of a gun clicking at the end of the track, and that was the one thing that finally made the man flee down the steps. I heard the door slam as he left the building. Shaking, I went back and checked the peephole to confirm he was actually gone. I considered still making a call to the police, but knew I wouldn't have much else besides my story. I decided to head into the kitchen and dining area to grab a bottle of water and take a seat. On the way, I passed the small balcony that was rarely ever used. Suddenly filled with fear again, I ran over and moved back the curtain to find nothing. I finally let out a sigh of relief when I remembered the apartment wasn't on the first floor. Still, I reached up my fingers and turned the lock. I've kept this to myself for far too long, and I don't think I can carry the weight anymore. Maybe writing it down will help. Maybe not. Either way, someone should know the truth before it's too late. If anyone reads this, don't dismiss it as the ramblings of a lunatic. I'm not crazy. I wish I were. I used to work at NASA. Officially, I was part of the public-facing missions, rovers, orbital studies, things they let the world see. Unofficially, I was involved in something else. Something hidden. something that makes me wish I'd never joined in the first place. It started in 2016 when the first classified images came back from Project Hermes. That's what we called it internally, a black budget mission that had been ongoing for decades, quietly probing Mars in ways the public could never know. We weren't just looking for signs of microbial life, we were looking for something bigger, something familiar, and we found it. The first anomalies were dismissed as natural formations, weathered rock, wind patterns, volcanic activity, but the more data we gathered, the harder it became to deny what we were seeing. Beneath the dust storms and red desolation, we found structures, not just rock shaped by chance, but deliberate architecture. Crumbled towers, shattered domes, and sprawling girds buried beneath the Martian surface. It was ancient, older than anything we'd ever imagined. They brought me into the project when it was clear we weren't dealing with random geology. My expertise in planetary systems made me an asset, or so they told me. In truth, I think they brought me in because I was naive enough to still be excited about the discoveries. I didn't understand the implications. Not then. It wasn't until we recovered the artifact that everything changed. They never let me see it in person. Few of us did. It was an obelisk, black as void and covered in intricate carvings, patterns that didn't match anything in Earth's archaeological record, or so we thought at first. The linguists worked on it for years before they made the breakthrough. The carvings weren't alien, they were human. That was the day we realized Mars wasn't a dead planet we'd stumbled upon in the vastness of space. It was home. Mars was our home. The artifact told a story, though it wasn't complete. The pieces of deciphered painted a grim picture. Mars had once been vibrant, oceans, forests, teeming with life, and then humanity happened. The wars, the greed, the arrogance. It started small, territorial disputes, resources, borders, but the conflicts escalated until the entire planet was engulfed in fire. Nuclear war, ecological collapse. No one could say for sure how it ended. All we knew was that Mars had become uninhabitable, and yet, against impossible odds, some of them escaped. They found a way for the dying world and journeyed across the void to Earth. We are the descendants of those survivors, refugees from a ruined world. I remember sitting in the lab when I first read the translated text. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow. I kept telling myself it couldn't be true. It had to be some cosmic coincidence, a shared evolutionary path, something. Anything but the truth was inescapable. The genetic markers, the shared cultural motifs, the timeline, it all aligned. We destroyed one planet already, and now we're doing it again. The higher-ups at NASA decided the public couldn't know. It would destabilize everything, they said. They weren't wrong. Religion, history, politics, it would all collapse under the weight of this revelation. But I can't help thinking that's what we need. A collapse, a reset, because if we don't change course, if we don't stop the wars and the greed and the mindless consumption, Earth will follow Mars into oblivion, and this time, there won't be another planet to flee to. Do you understand what I'm saying? There's nowhere else to go. The nearest habitable worlds are light years away, and we don't have the technology to get there. Earth is all we have, but we're blind to the precipice we're teetering on, just as we were before. And sometimes late at night, I wonder if it's already too late. The signs are there. Melting ice caps, mass extinctions, choking skies. It's starting again. The same cycle, the same death march. And I don't know how to stop it. What terrifies me most isn't that we're repeating history, it's the idea that we might not even be capable of change. Maybe this is who we are, creatures of destruction, destined to burn through one world after another until there's nothing left. I wish I could say I have hope, but I don't. Not anymore. All I have is this overwhelming sense of dread, this crushing certainty that we're hurtling toward our doom, and no one cares enough to stop it. Mars isn't what we thought it was, and Earth won't be either. When we're done with it. My wife's long black hair swept over her shoulder as she turned to tell me to hurry up. 6 miles into the hike, and she was still bounding with energy, while I neared the brink of collapse. Bang, 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 bang. Taking no notice of the pounding that had just drifted through the trees, she paused to allow me to catch up with her, and teased me for becoming an old man. Our 10th time making the trek, an annual tradition to return to the place where I'd proposed, and she looked as beautiful as she had on the first. Bang, 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 bang. It was louder now, enveloping us. Desperately I tried to ignore it too, fighting to stay in the moment, fighting to stay with her. I knew what was waiting if I gave in. Bang, bang, bang. I opened my eyes and she was gone, and I was back there. Light bringing no warmth streamed in through the window, and I shivered, uselessly pulling the meager, moth-bitten sheets tighter to my body. A full month's worth of frigid mornings had taught me to expect the chill air forcing its way through the cracks in the crumbling plaster walls, which brought with it the scent of fresh snow. And so continues the endless winter in hell, I grumbled, half awake as I reached blindly towards the bedside table and wrapped my hand around the glass that I knew would be waiting there, full to the brim with poisonous medicine. Swallowing its entire contents in 2 large gulps, I gagged on the flavor of tepid, watered-down, cheap whiskey, potent enough to keep the shakes at bay, yet not quite so strong as to bring any measure of real peace. At least its pain-numbing qualities exceeded those of the booze in the outside world, allowing me to choke back the tears brought on by my shattered back. Bang, 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 bang. The cacophony that had woken me continued down on the first floor. From the sound of it, our fresh arrival was still violently trying to come to terms with his new living arrangements, angrily shouting, pounding on the walls and based on the scraping and then the loud crashes that followed, attempting to hurl the dining room chairs through the windows. Henry will be furious about having to rebuild those again, I murmured. I took another swig from the glass that, by then, had refilled itself, and listened more closely to the man's words. With only 2 semesters of college Spanish under my belt, it was some time before I recognized anything that he was screaming. "Donde esté la puerta?" was the only thing I picked out that I fully understood. It will return soon enough, I thought to myself, polishing off my second helping of swill and setting the glass back on the table, feeling the weight of those words more heavily given the events of the last couple days. Best not focus on that part, though. I shuddered, propping my back up against the metal bars of the headboard and reaching once again for my only comfort in there, topped off as it was, for a 3rd time. Confined to my bed for the foreseeable future, I heard Henry's door open and his footsteps thump past mine as I knew, for the 3rd day in a row, he was going to attempt and calm the fresh tenant. And watching the haggard, dirty, broken man in the mirror that faced the bed raise the glass once again to his lips, I reflected back on my first day in the winter house. 2 years. It was 2 years to the day that I lost Sherry. It all happened so quickly. We were on our anniversary hike when, for the first time in our relationship, she fell behind me. Then, without warning, collapsed in the middle of the trail. Hospital visits, tests, diagnosis, treatment, fighting, losing, withering. Dead. 6 months. It's all it took. 37 years of healthy existence. 10 years of happy marriage. So much life still left in front of her. Dead. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear the high-pitched squeal of the machine announcing to me that her heart had stopped when I felt the last of her strength evaporate from the hands I was holding. For the next 2 years, I tried to carry on without her. Did everything I knew to pull myself out of the swirling pit of despair I dropped into the moment she stopped breathing. Friends, family, hiking, lifting, church. I even debated going to therapy. But my father had always told me that that was only for weak men. Every day I fell deeper into the hole, and every day the bottle loomed nearer. You see, Sherry and I had met in Alcoholics Anonymous. She was already 3 months sober at the time and comforted me on the very first day. Helped see me through the worst of my detox. Kept me going back to meetings. Became my biggest advocate. We were two broken souls that had enough pieces left to hold each other together, and once she was gone, mine was shattered once more. But she had made me promise that I would keep my sobriety in her absence. Made me swear it on the ring she'd worn on her hand every day of our marriage, and that I then wore around my neck every day after her passing. Yet one night I found myself in a bar. A bar I'd been to many, many times in my pre-Sherry life. A bar so familiar that, although I hung my head in shame, the feet I was watching carried me to a stool that, even after years of neglect, still felt like home when I sat in it. And without me uttering a single word, a drink appeared in front of me. Double whiskey, on the rocks. The bartender winked and asked where I'd been before shuffling off to take another patron's order. Staring at the ice cube suspended in the amber pour of my failure, I apologized to Sherry before drowning it in one practiced motion. 5 more helpings of the same tonic at the bar, and a stop at the liquor store on the way home, and I was feeling the best that I had in a long while. In fact, it was the only time in the last 2 years that I hadn't felt the crushing weight of Sherry's death bearing down on my chest, and I was experienced enough to know that the minute I sobered up again, the pain of her loss would return even more intensely than before. So I decided that night, on the walk between the liquor store and my house, that I was never going to be sober again. My plan was to continue drinking in every waking minute of every hour of every day of the remainder of my life until my liver finally would give out on me. And in that instant, I felt an incredible sense of relief. Everything seemed so simple then. I was a locksmith who worked for himself, so I didn't need to worry about being fired for intoxication. All I needed to do from then on would be to make enough money to afford my rent, utilities, food, and booze, while I waited for death to take me. What I did not know at the time was that I'd just made myself a target. When I arrived home that evening, I immediately stumbled my way into the kitchen and grabbed a plastic cup from the cabinet. Given I was already nearly toppling over with each step, I was certain I'd shatter anything glass if I tried to use it, and therefore was more than happy to fill my NASCAR chalice with a heavy dose of whiskey and ice. The next hour or so, I melted into the couch watching trash TV, working myself halfway through the 5th I'd purchased. It wasn't long before I passed out, empty vessel in hand, dreamlessly fading into nothing. I awoke with a headache, Around 3 in the morning, needing to pee fiercely and stupidly, I tried to sprint to the restroom, kicking the coffee table on the way there. Blind pain seared through what I imagined was likely a broken pinky toe in my right foot, necessitating that I limp the rest of my way to the toilet in our master bedroom. After I had finished my business, I debated brushing my teeth and laying down in bed for the rest of the night, but with the way my head was feeling, I knew that if I didn't get some more alcohol into my system before I fell asleep again, the morning would be horrendous. And walking back into our bedroom, I caught sight of something I hadn't noticed when I'd crossed through the space with my eyes bleary from the tears of my shattered toe. There was a glass on my bedside table, brimming with a brown liquid and ice effortlessly floating through it, tinkling softly as the cubes moved up and down. It appeared as if someone had just placed it there a moment ago. I blinked repeatedly to make sure it didn't disappear, but after closing my eyes and opening them for the 4th time, I resigned myself to its reality and focused then on how it could have gotten there. As I mentioned, I was only planning to drink out of my plastic cup for the evening. Moreover, as far as I was aware, I'd been knocked out on the couch until about 5 minutes prior. Had it been there when I came into the room initially? I pondered. It must have been, unless there was someone else in the house with me. My heart rate increased, considering the possibility that someone had invaded my home, and I stood stock still for a minute, listening intently for the sound of any other movement in the house. But all that met my ears was the gentle click of the ice, which I felt should have settled by that time. Yet when I looked back at the table, it was impossibly still stirring, as if disturbed by an unseen hand. Grabbing a baseball bat from the closet, I planned then to search the house and started first by checking that I had, in my drunken stupor, remembered to lock the front door. Sherry and I had had a break-in a couple years before she passed, and I had personally installed a special deadbolt that used keys which I'd made myself. Of those keys, there were only 2 in existence, and of those 2, I retained sole possession. So when I reached the door and found that I had indeed thrown the bolt behind me when I'd returned home earlier, I relaxed slightly, confident that no one could have picked the lock and entered through the main entrance. I conducted a thorough search of the remainder of the modest domicile. In doing so, I established that all other doors and all of the windows were locked, sealed, and undamaged, and I detected no trace of anyone besides myself within the walls. I was alone. So, I returned to my bedroom, praying as I crossed the threshold that the beverage would simply have vanished, and I could chalk the whole thing up to a hallucination. But I was sorely disappointed. There it still stood, solid as the moment I first laid eyes on it, ice continuing to bob up and down. The only explanation that I had for its presence then was that I had woken up, or maybe even sleepwalked, some time before I had arisen to pee, made myself a drink, placed it down next to my bed, and wandered back to the couch. But why would I do that? I confusedly considered. If that had been what happened, I would have had to have it done it very recently, as the ice looked unmelted. And it seemed so odd that I wouldn't have drank any of it before heading back to the living room. However, as it was the only explanation I could come up with that made any sense to me, and given I had been on my way to the kitchen to fix another drink before I spotted the one already waiting for me, I begrudgingly accepted that it must be the truth, brushing off the concerns that kept popping up in my head. With that, I approached the table and saw that as I did, my footsteps shook the contents, answering for me how it had appeared to be in a constant state of disturbance. I had been stomping around the house and creating the vibrations that were making it look alive. So easily, I ignored all of my worries. So easily, I lifted the glass from the table. So easily, I took a sip. And It was euphoria, the most delicious drink that had ever passed my lips. In fact, the most delicious thing I'd ever consumed in my life. Far beyond the quality of the piss I knew to be sitting in the plastic bottle in the kitchen that it should have tasted like. But I didn't care. I couldn't stop myself. Down, down, down. I gulped its entirety down in a wild frenzy, unable to move from the spot, unable to care for anything else. I ate the ice. I licked the inner walls of the glass clean. I was about to bite down on the glass itself when I snapped out of it. For a moment I felt nothing, but then as I lowered the empty container from my face, I was struck with an intense surge of pleasure. Every nerve ending surged with warmth. Every pain I'd ever known drifted away. Sherry's hollow, sickened face dissolved from my memories and was replaced with the smile that greeted my mornings for so many years. I needed more. Then, as if a bartender had heard my thoughts, I looked down to see the glass was full again. Madly, I snatched it up, draining the elixir even faster than the first helping. And I was rewarded. I began tingling with the sensations of every joyous minute I'd ever experienced. The best days of my life all flashed before my eyes. The smell of Sherry's perfume crept into my nostrils. At that moment, I was positive that I was happiest being on the planet. While I basked in bliss, a voice rose from the back of my mind, carrying with it only one word. More, it demanded. The glass was full again, and the third dose barely lasted a second. I felt Sherry's arms around my waist, wrapping me in a hug from behind. The weight of her head pressed down on my shoulder as she pulled me gently down onto the bed. Lovingly, she ran her fingers through my hair and whispered tenderly in my ear, "Don't worry, I've got you now." It was so sweet to hear her voice again, so sweet to feel her warmth beside me. "I've got you now," she repeated, yet this time the tenderness was gone. This time, a darkness filled each syllable. Panic replaced ecstasy, but I was helpless to do anything about it. Overwhelming exhaustion overcame me, and I was forced powerlessly into a heavy and dreamless slumber. Sunlight shone on the inside of my eyelids, and I cracked them open to find it was morning. Nothing about my bedroom appeared different than any other time I'd woken up there, besides that it was absolutely freezing for the middle of summer. Yanking the covers closer to me, I cocooned myself to attempt and warm my bones. But it was to little avail. A pounding headache prevented the events of the previous evening from returning immediately, but when I rotated my head to look at the clock on the bedside table, there was an empty space on it that I knew, for some reason, should have been occupied. The glass was gone. It all came back to me, and I, with a start, sat up in bed, quickly to be greeted with an incredible bout of nausea. Frantically, I ran for the restroom and began to vomit so furiously. I worried that I might not just expel what was inside my stomach, but actually launch my stomach itself into the toilet. It was the most miserable I had ever felt. A hangover so severe that I legitimately considered calling for an ambulance. You would have thought that in that instant, I'd be swearing off alcohol forever. Yet in reality, once I felt assured that I had nothing left inside my body to chuck up, the first thing I did was crawl like a baby to the kitchen to find my leftover whiskey from the night before. Any alcoholic can tell you that the fastest way to cure alcohol withdrawal is to consume more alcohol. So with trembling hands, I snatched the half-empty bottle down from the counter and, foregoing any imitations of sophistication, took 2 large pulls directly from it. I gagged and my stomach churned. It took every ounce of my fortitude to keep it down, but I was able to hold it. Sitting on the floor, I leaned against a cabinet and continued to take small sips every few minutes while I waited for it to take effect, and gradually I began to feel the hangover symptoms subsiding. Once I was able to focus on anything other than feeling horribly ill, I thought again about the night before, about the mysterious glass, about how perfect it made me feel. With its conspicuous absence that morning, I wondered if it had all been a very lucid dream. Maybe it really had been a hallucination brought on by the binge I'd gone on after such a long period of sobriety. Whatever the case, as the whiskey displaced more and more of the healthy ingredients of my blood, I focused less on the likely, imagined events of the night before, and more on the growing hunger. With that sensation returning, I knew that I would be feeling well enough to stand and hold myself to my feet. Swaying a bit more than I expected, I continued to take intermittent gulps of drink as I managed to fumble my way through a shower, teeth brushing, and getting dressed, so that I could at least head out to get a greasy fast food breakfast and another bottle for the afternoon. Feeling at least presentable enough for the liquor store, I stepped out through the front door, closed it behind me, and turned my key in the deadbolt to lock it, and when I spun it back to the center position to remove the key from the door, it got stuck. Yanking on it as hard as I could, it refused to pull free from the lock. I tried jiggling it a bit, but couldn't shake it loose. Then I tried twisting it back to the locked position, but it wouldn't budge that direction either. Annoyed, I was about to head to my truck to grab some of my smithing tools to force it to come out, when something happened. The key rotated on its own to unlock the door. I stared at it in disbelief for a moment. There was no way that should have been possible. Even if someone was standing on the other side of the door and had spun the deadbolt handle, it wouldn't have moved the key externally. Confused but significantly inebriated such that I was more frustrated than scared at the time, I tried to turn it back to lock the door again, but found it was now frozen in the unlocked position. Unsure of what to make of the situation, I decided to open the door to begin investigating the entire mechanism that was met with a sight that I'll never forget. My living room was gone. Instead, the door had opened to reveal the dingiest interior I'd ever seen. From what I could make out under a thick coating of dirt, there were wood floors where there should have been carpet, a dining room with a sloping table, and 3 crippled chairs took the place of my kitchen, and a sitting room with one tattered sofa occupied the space where my recliner and TV should have been. Every surface was topped with such a thick layer of dust that the only distinguishable color was gray, and the most confusing part was that directly in front of me, straight away from the front door itself, was a flight of stairs leading up to a second floor. But I lived in a 1-story home. I moved backwards 1 step and surveyed the exterior of the house just to make absolutely sure that I hadn't somehow blacked out and found my way to the wrong abode. But there were the numbers of my address on the letterbox right next to the door. As I had the night before, I blinked again and again in the hopes that my living room would return, but the decrepit image beyond the entry remained unchanged. There were the stairs leading up to the floor that could not exist. Fear began to eat its way through my liquid courage, and I reflected back on the glass from the night before. Maybe it hadn't been a dream. Maybe I'd been drugged. Maybe it was part of a government experiment of some kind with LSD. There needed to be a sane explanation for what I was seeing, as it was impossible that my door had randomly decided to open itself into another home. I went to take another step back, as my instinct then was to take off running, but before I could, a hand shot out from behind the door, a hand the size of my chest, a hand with haphazard, jagged spines jutting from the back of it, pointed fingers as long as my forearms wrapped themselves around my wrist, and I was pulled inside the dismal foyer before being violently thrown to the ground near the foot of the steps. I felt my elbow shatter, as it slammed into the floor and I heard the door crash shut behind me. Screaming in pain and terror, I turned now to face what had just ripped me into a nightmare, only to find my concept of a nightmare had been childishly underestimated. A naked, pale creature towered over me. Moving on all fours, it circled me like a predator, considering its next meal, and given the dagger-like carnivorous teeth, it displayed in a mouth that opened wide enough to consume my whole head in one bite. I believed it would not be too long before I discovered what it felt like to be prey. Its face was rounded, containing slits for nostrils and sunken black holes where there should have been eyes, but even lacking those, I knew it could see me. It met my gaze no matter what angle I watched it from. If not for the shape of the head and the humanoid hands, it would have appeared much like a 12-foot-long, hairless dog, but for one additional feature: the spines. I'd seen them on the back of the hand that grabbed me, but now that my eyes were adjusting to the light, and I'd blinked away many of the tears that had formed from the pain in my arm, I could see clearly that there were 4 to 5 inch spikes sticking out from its flesh on nearly every part of its body, sans its face, palms, and soles. Hundreds of them. There was no pattern of organization, and when they caught the light from the sun streaming through a window, I took them to be made of bone. On top of the talon-like fingers and the razor teeth, I then pondered that the spines on this thing might be venomous, and I started to cry once more, thinking through the horrible, painful ways in which I was about to die. It moved closer to me, and I braced myself for the inevitable, but then it simply stepped over my body and climbed the stairs behind me. I heard it make the hallway above, its steps receding further and further into the house, and then a door slam, and I was alone again. Gingerly, I got up from the floor and backed myself towards the entrance, never taking my eyes off the stairs in case that thing came charging back down them. I felt behind me for the wall and eventually made contact with it, blindly running my hands along its surface. I searched for the handle, but continued to feel nothing but smooth wood. Getting nowhere, I risked a look behind me to find the door, but was met with yet another shock. It had vanished. Staring at a bare wall between 2 windows, my brain broke momentarily and I began laughing hysterically at what I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing: it wasn't real. It couldn't be real. It was a joke of some kind. It had to be. I turned around expecting people to pop out from behind the moldy sofa, but no one came. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket to see if I had any messages from friends saying they got me, to find that it wouldn't turn on, though it had had a full charge when I'd walked out of my house just minutes earlier. Surveying the room around me further, I saw only candles and oil lamps for lighting, no outlets or appliances. I wondered if I'd somehow stepped outside of time. With the dire nature of my situation setting in more and more by the minute, I again felt panic building in my chest. Sprinting to one of the windows that flanked where the door should have been, I peered outside to see if I could flag down someone from the street to help me. But my street was not outside those windows. I don't know what I'd expected. I'd been pulled into a home not my own, and could then see that the world outside was not the one I'd left behind earlier. The world outside didn't even appear to be in the same season as the one I'd come from. Thick snow blanketed the ground in a sea of trees that stretched further than my eye could discern. Somehow I'd traveled from summertime in suburbia to a winter forest in an instant. What little buzz I'd had going before leaving my house that morning was fading rapidly, and I was not going to be able to contain my terror much longer. Feeling that fleeing on foot through the woods would be better than exploring any deeper into the house and possibly running into even more terrible creatures, I tried to pry open the window I was looking out of, but it wouldn't move. I searched for a lock that might be holding it shut, or nails, or screws, anything that could prevent it from letting me out. But there was nothing that I could locate. Throwing all caution away, I started to punch and kick the window, following my body's instinctual desire to run, but it seemed nothing I did could crack the glass. Overtaken by dread, I forgot even the fear that the monster I'd already met would come soon to devour me, and yelled for someone. Anyone to help me, while I smashed my body into the panes. Eventually, I even tried to throw a chair through it, and it did nothing more than break the chair into pieces. And it was when I did this that I heard a voice behind me curse in a thick French accent. "It took me weeks to mend that last time," it snapped. I shouted and jumped back against the wall, after finding a waif of a man behind me, dressed in the remains of what had possibly been business attire at one time. He'd previously had a mustache, but now above his lips were a few tufts of unkempt mange, and much of the gray, matted hair on his head looked to have been yanked out. His teeth were rotting, and his skin browed with dirt, but not enough to cover the needle marks in both of his arms. A junkie. "Where am I? What do you want?" I blurted at the man, who threw a finger in front of his mouth and shushed me threateningly. "I want you to shut up and quit breaking stuff." "It doesn't like when we fight," he whispered ominously, eyes darting to the second floor. I dropped my voice lower. "Who are you? What is it? What is this place?" I asked. He indicated himself, am Henry Laurent. This, he gestured to the room around him, is the Winter House. And it, he pointed up the stairs where the creature had disappeared, is the house. And the house is it. He was speaking nonsense, clearly high on whatever he'd shot into his veins. My face must have shown my distaste for his BS when I was clearly in distress, as he smiled and continued, "You think I'm messed up and spouting gibberish at you, no?" He gave a quiet chuckle. I thought the same thing when Beau explained it to me, but he tried to, gently, deliver the news. "I feel it's easiest for you to hear the blunt truth. You'll come to accept it more quickly that way." "Accept what?" I inquired. "That you are dead," he said nonchalantly. "I'm dead?" I snapped involuntarily. "Not quite yet exactly, but you will never leave here alive. Think of this place as a sort of purgatory, a miserable purgatory." He trailed off. "Please," I pleaded with him. "I just want to go home. Can you help me get out of here?" "Were you not listening?" he quipped. "You cannot leave. No one leaves the house once it has them. It brought you here to feed on you, and there it will never let you go." "Stop," I begged him. It was too much. My whole body was shaking, and I was struggling to breathe. "Please, I don't want to hear anymore. I just want to go home." I sniffled with tears returning to my eyes. "Oh, but you are home," he said unsympathetically. "There's already a room prepared for you upstairs." "This isn't my home," I shouted. "Of course it is. You accepted the invitation." He gave a yellow-toothed smile. "Invitation?" I racked my brain for a memory of accepting an invite to live with a monster and a junkie Frenchman when it hit me. The glass. The drink. "You remember now, no?" he pestered. "What was it? Pills? Cocaine?" "A whiskey," I stammered. "Ah, yes, alcoholic then. Mine was heroin, the best I'd ever had. 3 needles full. The stuff here is terrible, but it's all there is." His expression dropped to one of deepest longing. "There's heroin here?" I was astonished. "Heroin, alcohol, pills, meth, cocaine. Whatever brought you here will be here for you. Always." He paused momentarily. The house provides, he finished, then walked towards the shattered chair and picked up some of the pieces. There was a pile in the corner of the room with the remains of several other pieces of furniture, and it appeared he was going to try and mend the chair using pieces of different chairs and still more pieces of chairs as tools. You'll see. He started up again. Go check your room. Up the stairs and first door on the right. There will be something waiting for you in there that I'm sure you're beginning to get desperate for. Upstairs? Are you crazy? That thing is upstairs. I had every intention of keeping as much space between me and the monster until I could figure out what was going on. Oh, it won't bother you now, he said. It was only down here to let you in. It'll stay in its room until it's time to feed again, or unless we try to kill each other. He could see that I did not trust him at his word. Fine, he sighed. Would you like me to show you to your room? I did not want Henry to show me anywhere. I wanted to wake up. I tried to slap myself several times, but only found Henry's laughing face staring back at me each time that I did. Follow me. He made a motion behind him and walked towards the stairs. Come, there is something in your room that will make this easier. I saw no reasonable alternatives. I could continue to try and smash unbreakable windows and find an invisible door, or I could follow Henry to my room, being I was unwilling to explore any of the rest of the house alone. So trepidatiously, I accompanied him. Henry showed me up to the second floor, which comprised a single hallway that led straight back to a door at the end, with 3 others branching off on the sides. The warden lives down there. He pointed to the door at the end of the hall. I'm in here. He threw a thumb towards the first door on the left. Beau's in there. He jabbed a finger to the second door on the left. And that leaves you in here. We stopped in front of the only door on the right-hand side of the hall. I opened my mouth to ask him more questions, including why he'd referred to the creature as the warden, but he shushed me for a second time. Just go in and get your head right. I'll explain how it all works. Well, at least what's been passed to me, and the little I understand of it. Once you've taken the edge off a bit. He gave an encouraging nod towards the door, and I opened it to see a small and rather shabby room. My initial reaction was that it had no redeeming qualities whatsoever, and I was unsure what Henry was referring to as something that would help inside. A small cot, one might generously call a bed, sat under a window on the right-hand side with a mirror facing it from the opposite wall. On the left, there was a putrid-looking toilet, and the only other furniture was a small nightstand which was barren except for a glass of whiskey. The adrenaline had been masking it, but now that my body no longer felt it was in imminent threat of death, the withdrawal symptoms were encroaching and the pain in my elbow was peaking. I don't recall entering the room or walking to the edge of the bed. All I know is 1 second I was at the entry with Henry, and the next I was holding the glass in my hand. Hesitating and remembering the many warnings I'd been given during my life to not accept strange food or drinks, I turned back towards the door expecting Henry to be there providing affirmation that it was okay to take a sip. But he'd gone. Instead, I was startled by the touch of another hand on the one that was holding the drink. A gentle hand. Sherry's hand. My body was frozen by its presence, other than the arm she was guiding. She pushed the glass towards my mouth, and from behind me, she cooed when it reached my lips. It's okay, baby. You need this. So I drank. It was a pale imitation of the quality of the invitation, warm and with a flavor more reminiscent of top-shelf booze than the transcendent experience I'd had the previous night. However, in that moment, it was everything that I craved. My body relaxed the instant the liquid touched my tongue, and while the powerful ecstasy did not return either, the calming effect was exquisite. Even the pain in my elbow receded. Though the high was muted from what I knew was possible, it was still enough for me to beg for more. and my wish was granted. I stood, rooted in place, while Sherry's hands nudged me through 2 more helpings, and while I considered that it could have just been due to my intoxication level increasing, I couldn't help but notice each glassful tasted less potent. When I set the glass down the 3rd time, Sherry left me. "No, no, no, come back," I yelled, but she did not return. Alone once more, and with my fear then sufficiently muted that I could begin to process the position I'd landed in, Henry's words floated through the drunken haze. "The house provides." Looking down at the table, the glass was yet again full, and the meaning of that statement sank into my mind. The house could give me a chance to feel my wife's touch again, hear her voice, see her smile, and it would furnish me with as much alcohol as I wished to drink. It brought you here to feed on you. But it would also take from me. Sherry was not there to show me real love, and she would not stay to bring me real joy. She was part of the house. I reflected on Henry's sallow features and wondered what he might have looked like when he first arrived, contemplating who might be handing him the needles in his suite. "You will never leave here alive." And I was going to die there. I was going to die there. Studying the room threatening to be my tomb, I caught then something carved into the walls. Names. So many names. A shaking hand darted for the glass again, and I dumped more relief into my stomach, pushing the doom as far from my thoughts as I could. It took 7 more doses before I stopped sobbing, replacing horror with tiredness. I lay down on the mattress, somehow more concerned with sleeping than finding a way out of there. The house provides. In the weeks that followed, Henry taught me more about the winter house, so called by its tenants for the perpetual season it resided in. Lacking insulation, it was always cold within the walls, and as I learned with any discomfort there, the only respite could be found on the table in my room. Hunger, thirst, tiredness, cold, boredom, depression, fear, even arousal. Alcohol was all the house lent for me to cope. For Henry, it was the needle. For Beau, pills. The human body behaved differently within its confines than it did in the outside world. One could not starve there or dehydrate, though the sensations of needing food or drink would become overpowering if you tried to stop consuming your vice. And it was not possible to overdose, but rather overindulge would merely bring a relief. Restless sleep, carrying with it only nightmares and painful memories. All residents, male and female, found themselves impotent there. Not that desire was removed, it could just only be managed with narcotics or drink. And while we were not discouraged from interacting with one another or leaving our rooms, were free to converse and roam as we pleased, I quickly learned that addicts made poor conversationalists, and there was no more to the house to discover beyond the dining room, sitting room, and our bedrooms. No kitchen, no library with books, or living room with television. One afternoon, I asked Henry why the house even bothered with the dining table we were sitting at, being we didn't need to eat, or a couch being we had no entertainment to enjoy on it. "Reminders," he told me. "Reminders of what?" I responded. "Of the lives we left behind, of a meal with family, of a movie night with a lover. The house is clever. If it just trapped us, alone in our rooms, and forced us to use all day and night, no one would last more than a few weeks here. But it lets us talk. It lets us come downstairs and see a sunrise, sit at the table and imagine being back in our own homes, at our own tables. And in doing so, it lets us keep a fraction of hope alive, a sliver of a dream that we'll make it out of here someday, allowing it to savor its meals for longer." He paused. "But no one can hold out indefinitely. The door will return soon. I do not think Beau will last much longer. He cared for Alice. He was not the same after she left. He dropped his face into his hands and said the last few words through his fingers. Beau had not emerged since I'd arrived at the house nearly 4 weeks earlier. I'd initially surmised that Henry had made him up, having been driven mad by his 3-month stay there, consuming nothing but heroin. But sometimes at night, I'd hear movement from Beau's room, or a moan of anguish, confirming his reality. "The door will return?" I asked. "Yes. Once an invitation has been sent, the door will materialize, but an invitation cannot be sent until a room has opened." His voice faltered slightly near the end. "And how does a room open?" I pressed. "I told you on your first day here, you will not leave here alive." He shrugged. "So I'll just keep drinking until the alcohol finally kills me?" The house had chosen well if that was its goal, given I'd already decided to do that the night that it invited me in. "No." He stood from the chair and walked towards one of the front windows before continuing. "No, it will not let your vice take you quietly. Your body will not eventually just give up, nor will you be able to overdose, as you're aware already. Your body will rot from the inside, and you will feel pain, unbearable pain, but you will not die." "So you're saying—" I believed I knew where he was going, but wasn't ready to speak it aloud myself. "Yes, if you want this to end, if you want to leave here, you will have to end things yourself, violently, painfully. It knows that you want to die, that's why it brought you here. It knows that you'd given up on fighting your addiction, and were just going to passively drink yourself to death. That's why it targeted you. It's why it targeted me, and Beau, and Alice, and the hundreds of others that occupied all of our rooms before us. We are its favorite meal, those so unwilling to seek help or feel our pain that we'd rather mask it until we simply expire. If our addiction is its dinner, our suffering its seasoning, then our deaths are its dessert. You will find that one day, when you begin to wish to die more than to alive, the house will change. It won't send your wife to put a glass in your hand. It'll send her to hang a noose." Tears were welling in his eyes. "Beau warned me it would happen. Alice had been looking worse and worse for weeks. Her skin and eyes yellowed. She said her son had been telling her that it was time, and then one day she stopped coming out of her room and we heard something kicked over. Choking, gagging, silence, and Christ, I can't." He wiped his face with his soiled shirt. "Overnight the door formed. I tried to open it, of course, but it was locked. It needed a key." He finished. I was feeling sick to my stomach, something I knew I could easily fix by heading back to my room, but I wanted to know more, so I asked, "What do you mean, it needed a key?" "You will see soon. I do not think my description would do it justice." And with that, he headed back up the stairs to shoot up. Henry refused to say more on the subject when I inquired further, but I did not need to wait long for answers. It was just a couple nights later when I was laying in my bed and powering through enough whiskey to knock myself out for a few hours, that I heard the same sounds Henry had described from Alice's demise coming from Beau's room. Something climbing on top of something, a chair being kicked over. Choking. I tried to block it out, even covered my ears with my pillow, but it forced me to listen, to hear every agonizing gurgle of Beau's final moments, to foreshadow what it had planned for me, somehow amplifying every excruciating detail directly into my brain. Yet as traumatic as it was to eavesdrop on another man hanging himself, Henry had not prepared me for the noises that would soon permeate the walls. Maybe it had been too horrible for him to wish to recount. First, it was the door at the end of the hallway bursting open, followed by the heavy clunks of the warden moving towards Beau's door, and finally the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor, being dragged back to its lair. Then, squelching, crunching, chewing. Again, I tried to obscure the sounds, but it was no use. So, as I'd been trained to do, I reached for my glass only to find that, for the first time, it was empty. The house was not going to give me anything to dull the moment, and I knew it had done the same to Henry when I heard his anguished screams blending with the chorus of consumption. I considered running from my room, but was too terrified to what I'd see, as I had not heard the warden's door close behind it. There was nothing I could do but wait and shake and cry and vomit. The house relished in its dessert, relished in every second of our combined despair, until silence fell again. A weight pressed down on the bed beside me, and as I turned to see Sherry holding the glass in her hand, topped mercifully with salvation. "Shh, it's okay, baby. You can have this now," she purred. I hungrily pulled the drink from her and poured it down my throat. "That's it. It's okay. Your age is away from that. You still have so much left to give me. Rest now." And she was gone again, only there to feign comfort, only there to imitate compassion, a phantom that, if Henry was to be believed, when I was all used up, would walk me to self-imposed gallows. I had avoided it to that time, but I could not help a glance in the mirror to see what I'd become, and was appalled with the man reflected back at me. The fat had melted from my cheeks, and deep bags sat below bloodshot eyes. What color had remained of my hair was now replaced with gray, and the majority of it had receded. I looked like the face of a dying man. The house could not refill my glass quickly enough that night, and eventually I collapsed back onto the bed, preferring the nightmares I might find in my dreams to the one before me. The following day, I did not leave my room until I heard Henry venture from his, which was after nightfall, and I only did so cautiously, first peeking to see if the warden's door was opened. Upon finding it shut, I ventured down the stairs to find Henry swaying in front of something that had sprung up between the two front windows. A door, which, as with the rest of the house, was ancient, heavy, likely made of oak, and had an iron doorknob that sat beneath a lock carved, from what I could tell, out of bone. "See, I told you. Here it is. An invitation has been sent. Now we wait for it to be accepted." Though he spoke calmly, his face appeared to have aged years overnight. Well, he had not indicated to me that Beau was a friend, or that they were close in any way. I knew from his stories that Beau had been there since Henry had arrived. With Beau's death, I wondered if Henry was considering how long it would be before the house would take him too. "How will we know if it's been accepted?" I asked, trying to focus the subject on anything other than the events of the previous night. "The warden will make a key," came his cryptic response. "What do you mean, it'll make a key?" I annoyedly followed up. "You will see soon," he said, before reaching forward to try the knob. It was, as he indicated it would be, locked. I tried it myself, though it might have remained a wall for all the success I had. But I was not completely deterred. I studied the lock, wondering if I might be able to find something laying around that I could use to pick at. Yet, it was unlike anything I'd seen before. In fact, it looked to me as if it were still waiting for a key to be designed for it. Still, I thought it might be worth a shot to see if I could get it to turn. And finding a nail on the floor, I stuck it into the opening. Immediately the nail glowed orange and burned my fingers before melting to the floor. Henry chuckled while I shook my singed skin through the frigid air. I guess I must applaud you for trying, but this door can only be opened by one of the warden's keys. He snorted. So we just need to steal one of those then, right? I asked. He laughed harder. Oh, if only it were that simple, my friend. His mirth was cut short when a bang came from upstairs. Henry exclaimed. We had no time to react. It was only in that brief flash that I truly appreciated how small the house was compared to the size of the warden. In what must have been seconds, it made its way from its room down the stairs and had grabbed us both around the ankles. Then it madly dragged us by our legs, smashing our bodies step by step, up to the second floor before unceremoniously throwing each of us into our respective rooms. And as I lay there, certain I'd broken several ribs in the journey, I heard it tear back down the stairs, screeching horribly as it did, clearly in terrible distress. Reaching for my whiskey to numb the pain in my chest, I next tiptoed to my door to see what was going on below, and when I made it to the hallway, I saw that Henry was leaning out from his room, a fresh needle mark in his arm, to watch the scene unfolding downstairs as well. Down on the first floor, the warden's shrieks became more and more intense as it slammed itself around, pounding on the walls, charging to and fro. Confused, I wondered briefly if it was trying to escape when suddenly it stopped just in front of the door, holding one of its hands out before its face. There, in the palm, a spike was forcing its way out, exactly like the ones that covered the rest of its body. A pointed bone jammed through its skin before, slowly, the tip began to form into a jagged but methodical shape. A key. I couldn't believe I didn't recognize them before, but I had only seen the warden the one time previously, and my eyes had been somewhat clouded by painful tears. The spines protruding from its skin were not tipped with venomous points, but with keys. Hundreds of keys. Various shapes and sizes dating back to locking mechanisms in the early 1800s. I understood then why Henry had thought the idea of stealing a key from the warden to be so humorous. One would literally need to be snapped off of its body. The warden continued to bellow until the key finished glowing and taking shape before it fell silent again. And then it waited. Patiently it hovered in front of the door, anticipating something that did not come until well after the sun rose the following morning, when a noise I recognized all too well met my ears. The turning of a key in a lock from outside the house. I watched then, as the warden inserted the newly formed key in its palm into the lock on the door and, pausing but for a moment, rotated it to the unlocked position. Silently I screamed in my head for the person on the other side to run away, to not be as stupid as I was to crack the door open. But it was no use. I saw the knob turn. The warden hid behind the door as it crept open, and I observed in the opening a man confusedly scanning the space before his eyes. There, behind him, was a rainy street with cars splashing through puddles, and I considered for an instant, sprinting down the steps and diving out to freedom. Yet before I could start my legs, the warden reached through, just as it had for me, and yanked the man inside. He was forcefully smashed to the ground, and I heard something snap as he began to wail in pain and fear. But I was not watching him. I was watching the warden slam the door behind him, watching it remove its hand from the lock and the key retract into its palm, watching a new quill spring up in the forest on the creature's back, and watching the door dissolve once again into a solid wall. The warden circled the new arrival once before climbing the stairs again, and my first inclination was to withdraw into my room before it passed by, but I was overcome with an impulse that I could not ignore. A wildly stupid impulse. As it lumbered by my door, I waited until its back right leg was set down in front of me. Then I reached forward, wrapped my fingers around one of the spines on its ankle, and snapped it off. It howled with shock and pain, whipped around, and struck me with such force that I was knocked clear across the room and into the wall. Something cracked in my back, and I was met with the worst agony in all my days. I was sure that the warden was going to come in and crush more of my bones, but its head just hovered in the doorway. It looked to the key I held in my hand and observed the anguish on my face before simply turning away and continuing back to its hole. Perplexed, I could not believe that it allowed me to keep the key, wondering why it had not pursued to wrench it from my grasp. But when I looked down, I solved the mystery quickly. The spine in my hand was only that, a spine. The key had not been intricately carved out of its point when I removed it from the warden's leg only moments before. It was smoothed out. It was useless. And my back was broken. A fine reward for my brazen idiocy. I screamed from the torment racking my nerves, but also to the futility of my situation. For a brief second, I'd allowed myself to believe there was a way out, to believe I was not going to waste away for months, to hang myself, to be eaten by a monster. Henry left his room once the warden was safely locked away, and paused at my door long enough to say, "You are a moron," before heading down to the first floor to attempt and calm the new arrival. He had explained to me already that we could not enter each other's rooms, so I knew he could do nothing to help me, but his lack of empathy still stung on top of everything else. At least I'd tried to do something to get us out of there, rather than just waiting for the house to consume us. "You're a very naughty boy, William," Sherry's mocking voice cut in, as I felt the glass slip into my hand. "Drink up. That back is going to take a long time to heal. You'll need a lot of this." It was 2 days before I was able to move from the floor. The drink helped with the recovery, but only enough that I could get to my bed where I remained for the next week. From my convalescence, I could hear Henry trying to communicate with our new tenant, Manuel, but they had not made much progress yet. Henry spoke French and English, and Manuel only Spanish. While I was confused, I had nothing but time to think, and I delved firstly into why I'd done what I'd done to begin with. Why was I even searching for a way out of the house, when the house was giving me exactly what I wanted before it brought me there? All I had to do within its walls was drink and die. It even removed all other worries from the outside world. Bills, food, injury, work. The house provides. So then, why the impulse to survive? Why the drive to escape? Was it just that I could not stomach the idea of dangling myself from a noose? Or was it that, by forcing me to listen to Beau's death, by refusing to let me be deaf to his final consumption, the house had inadvertently sparked my will to live? Whatever the case, as I lay in that bed, I resolved that I would not die there. I resolved to go home. And I believed that it was not impossible. The house had shown me something the day Manuel arrived. It was vulnerable. If we truly could not leave the house, then why would the warden have bothered to return us to our rooms before it opened the door? What would it care if we were down there when it pulled someone new inside? Unless it was worried that while it was open to someone entering, someone else could exit. I mulled over plans for some time that involved me sprinting down the stairs the second the door was cracked, and I considered the timing of it, and the sheer size of the warden, and every scenario that I played out in my head ended with it breaking several of my bones well before I reached the portal. I did not think it was wise to test the warden's speed and strength. And while I did not think that it would outright kill me, as the house would then lose one of its meals, I had just been made brutally aware that it was willing to destroy large parts of my body in defense of itself. However, I thought again on what had happened when I snapped one of the keys from its leg, and I felt there was another clue in the warden's behavior afterwards. It had made sure that the spine in my hands had ceased to be a key before it returned to its hovel. Why would it do that? If it knew any key removed from its body would become useless in human hands. With that question in mind, I examined what I knew about the winter house worked from Henry's descriptions and my own observations, and I arrived at a conclusion. I could use my own key to escape. The house needed to put a piece of itself out into the world to invite us in. The drink I'd found on my nightstand, the needles Henry had discovered on his dresser, and when we had accepted the invitation, we'd given a piece of ourselves back to the house, a piece which it used to create the key and bridge the divide into our world. It was a theory, obviously, but if I was to hold on to any hope of surviving the nightmare, it was one that I needed to believe in. The key was created equally by me and by the house, and only its makers could use it to access the outside world. And while I had firm faith that my key would retain its form in my hands, I had two major issues to overcome. The first was finding my key amongst the hundreds the warden retained on its body. Though I was certain I could recognize the cuts that I'd personally designed, it would take careful and close inspection for me to locate it. The second, and no less daunting, would come after I'd discovered it. That was how to remove it and fit it into the door without the warden mangling my body. Over the next several days, a plan took shape in my mind, a plan that would require the help of Henry and Manuel. Neither man was very keen on my proposal when I shared it with them after finally recovering enough to leave my room. Manuel could not understand much of it, but he gleaned enough from the conversation to surmise that it was very dangerous. Henry simply thought it would never work. Around the splintered table in our 3 ramshackle chairs cobbled together by a bored and restless Henry, we discussed my fantastical plan for escape. "You're going to get us killed," Henry said. "I don't think so," I replied. "I don't think the warden will take it that far. You forget what you told me on my first day here. It is the house, and the house is it. Remember? It doesn't want to take our lives. It wants us to do that ourselves. Otherwise it can't savor its meal the way it wants to. Break us, sure. I have first-hand experience with that one, but we can recover from those injuries quickly here and try again." While our vices did speed the recovery process, they also never allowed the damage to our bodies to fully heal. My elbow still bothered me daily, and the destruction of my back made every move agonizingly tedious. I'd also noticed that every drink the house gave me was weaker than the last. It was very slowly working to wear me down and increase my suffering, but I was willing to weather significant pain if it would afford us the chance at freedom. "Even if that's true, you'll never find your key," Henry quipped. But I was confident that I could. I would just need their assistance. The warden rarely emerged, so there would normally be few opportunities to search it. Yet Henry had said that it would come out to separate us if we tried to murder one another, as it would be a wasted meal too, if we were to die by each other's hands. So in my mind, it was a simple proposition. We would need to fight one another, often brutally, seriously. We would need to be convincing enough that the house would have to intervene, and while the warden was punishing us, I would have a window for an up-close inspection of its hoard. It took several days to convince my compatriots to join my resistance. I believe Henry capitulated as his own mortality weighed on him more and more by the hour. Manuel, I think, was simply afraid and looking for anything to distract him from the bleak world he'd been unwillingly forced into. In all actuality, I did not necessarily need their endorsement for my plan to progress. I could have just as easily attacked either of them without permission, but I felt that if they did not know why I was doing it, they might ambush me someday and quickly finish me off before the warden could stop them. As well, my conscience just would not let me keep it a secret from them, especially considering the second piece of my strategy. I dreaded discussing it, and was hoping I might be able to leave it as something to be sorted later, but Henry figured it out on his own. But of course, this is only half an idea. Even if you can locate your key, and even if you could remove it from the warden, you would need the door to return to use it. And for the door to return, one of us must die, Henry somberly stated. And as you believe you must be the one to wield your key, it must be either me or Manuel. I could not look him in the eye when I replied with a quiet, yes. Manuel caught on and, holding up a couple fingers, said, "Only two?" "Yes," I added. "Only two of us will be able to leave, and I must be one of them. Once I locate the key, we'll need to wait for the door to return, and once it's arrived, we'll stage one more fight. When the warden attacks me, I'll snap the key off, and one other spine so it will, hopefully, only see the one that isn't mine turn into a useless spike while, in the confusion, I stash the real one in my pocket. Then when it leaves us alone again, whatever state we're in, we'll drag ourselves to the door. I'll let us out, and we're home free." "It's all we've got," I concluded. Though, while the pain sounded straightforward enough on paper, it turned out to be much more difficult in practice. Henry's body was deteriorating rapidly. All of ours were, really, as we had to continue to use our vices in order to get through the day, especially considering that if we did not, we became so sick and weak that we would not have the energy or strength to convincingly try to kill one another. However, Henry was so far gone already that, on our first attempt, I broke several of his ribs with a half-hearted punch before the warden fractured his skull. It was a brutal game we played. Desperately in each trial, I scanned the warden for the telltale cuts of my key, but the warden was fast and violent. Still, we were undaunted. We tried again and again, with Manuel and I taking the brunt of the punishments as Henry took far longer to recover than either of us. Then, after 4 months and countless failed attempts in which I suffered innumerable injuries, included a crushed foot, broken arm, broken nose, several deep gashes, and a dislocated shoulder, Henry stopped emerging from his room entirely. I tried to speak with him through the door, urged him to carry on. I promised him that we were close, and that he could maybe go home soon. But it was too late. I could hear him speaking softly in his final hours. Okay, yes, you're right. I'm ready. It's too much. I'm ready." He had never told me who it was that haunted his room, but I knew there was a loved one in there, someone that he trusted, convincing him that it was time for him to die. The house had squeezed every ounce of life from him that it cared to take. The meal was finished, and it was ready for its dessert. I care not to describe the sounds of that evening again, but suffice to say they will never leave my ears. Henry was not someone I would have called a friend, but he had been there since my very first day, and his passing was difficult for me to stomach. With his loss, I felt the walls of the house closing in on me ever more. However, as bleak as the morning following Henry's death was, there was one macabre upside to his demise. When I went downstairs to inspect, I found Manuel standing in the living room staring at the space between the two front windows. where the door had materialized once again. Manuel turned to face me, and I could see from his mostly vacant gaze and the bloodshot eyes that he'd likely swallowed an entire bottle of pills after the house had finished with Henry. Yet, buried beneath the stupor of blunted horror and disgust, there appeared a determination which I had not recognized in him before. Manuel had, assuredly, gone along with the escape attempt so far, but with a hesitation that suggested he felt it wasn't the only way we might leave the house. I don't think he had truly believed that he would die there, and still held on to hope he may one day just wake up in a hospital bed recovering from a near-fatal overdose. It had clearly been a humbling experience for him, as it had been for me, to listen to another man's life end in such harrowing fashion. Without a word to one another, we both understood the opportunity that lay before us, and that, for at least one of us, this would be the last chance to get out alive. A small nod from Manuel told me that he was ready, and I charged him with all the remaining strength in my body. Tackling him to the ground, I pummeled his ribs with my fists, not bothering to hold back this time. He, having spent far less time in the house, was not nearly as diminished, and was able to flip me over onto my back with relative ease before he pinned me down and closed his fingers around my windpipe. Blackness began to press in on my eyes as my brain was refused oxygen, and when I was on the brink of losing consciousness, I heard the familiar blast of the warden's door smashing open. It came more furiously, and more quickly than it had any time previously. Even though I was hovering between life and death at the time, I was sure it was mere seconds between it leaving its room and it hurtling Manuel from atop me. There was an incredible crash as Manuel landed on the table, and it collapsed in a flurry of splinters, and the warden followed him to dole out more abuse, while I gasped air into my lungs, trying furiously to regain my vision. The snapping of bones jolted me from the floor, and I rolled to see that the warden had stomped on Manuel's ankle, cracking it in two. He cried out in torturous suffering, and I felt a pang of sympathy, but I was not looking at his newly crippled leg. I was looking at the leg the warden had used to inflict the damage. There, on the back of the thigh, just above the bend of the knee, was a familiar shape. With the warden distracted and raising its fist to deliver a blow I knew would be aimed at knocking out several of Manuel's teeth, I crawled as quietly as I could towards their struggle, inching closer and closer, eyes locked on our only hope. When I was just an arm's length away, I raised myself to my feet and braced for the onslaught I was sure would be rained down upon me momentarily. Then, swiftly, I threw my hands forward, wrapping my right around the base of the spine tipped with my key, and left around a random second. With a twist of my wrists, I snapped both of them clean from its body in one motion, and I was met instantly with a backwards kick to the diaphragm. The blast sent me through the air, 10 feet across the room, the shock of which knocked the decoy from my left hand, but miraculously, I managed to hold on to the true one in my right, working to recover my breath yet again, having had it knocked from me by the powerful shot to the chest, and blinking the stars from my eyes brought on from the slam of my head against the ground when I landed. I cautiously looked upon the item I gripped tightly in my palm. The key remained at the tip. I had precious little time to celebrate, however, as the warden had rounded on me. It directed its wicked focus to what I'd stolen from it, and my planned subterfuge was thwarted instantaneously. We would not be able to slip out quietly like I'd hoped. It was now or never. Where I'd fallen, I was directly in front of the door, and the warden looked from me, back to it, and back to me again, both of us recognizing the gravity of each of our next moves. I rolled towards the door, reaching from the ground for the knob with my empty hand and aiming the key for the lock. But before I could insert it, I felt the monster's hand around my leg pulling me back. It grabbed my right arm and with its incredible strength attempted to crush it with the aim of forcing me to release my grasp. But I held firm, struggling fiercely to rip myself away, knowing that if I dropped the key, it would lose form, and I would be dooming Manuel and I. Yet, the pain was becoming unbearable. I could feel the bones in my forearm beginning to splinter when suddenly I was released. Manuel had dragged himself across the floor and had picked up the spine I'd naively believed would work to fool the warden. In a stroke of improvised genius, he jammed the point of it into one of the empty black sockets of the warden's face, causing it to recoil in pain and confusion. In the brief reprieve this granted us, the warden ran around the room trying to pry the impalement free. I was able to lift myself from the floor, slide the key into the lock, and rotate it. A loud, beautiful click told me that it had worked, and understanding that any hesitation would cost the both of us our lives, I threw the door open to find my front yard before me. A gentle summer breeze met skin that had not felt warmth in months. I breathed in the miraculous smell of fresh-cut grass as I spun and reached for Manuel's hand. Hobbled as he was, I did not want to waste time trying to get him to his feet to limp out, and instead began yanking to drag him through the opening behind me. But the warden had finally been able to pull the intrusion from its face and recovered. Witnessed that we were nearly free of it. It latched onto Manuel's broken leg and pulled him the opposite direction of me. Back into the house. Back into hell. I tried with every ounce of fortitude left in my emaciated body to heave him loose of its grip, but it was of no use. Slowly Manuel's hand slipped through my fingers. The last my eyes met his, I tried to wordlessly let him know how sorry I was, tried to thank him for all he'd done, tried to find any measure of forgiveness in his expression, but all I saw was fear and pleading for me not to leave him behind. Yet I knew that it was over. There was nothing more I could do for him. If I did not leave then, neither of us would be getting out. So, too fearful of that prospect, and truly hating myself for it, I turned away from Manuel. I pulled the key from the lock, I stepped through the portal, and I slammed the door behind me. It's been 2 years since my stay in the winter house, and up to this writing, I had not shared the details of my time there with anyone. Who would have believed me anyways? The instant the door had closed, the key turned to dust in my hand, and though I was confident the bridge between this world and there was broken, I did not dare immediately check whether the door now opened into my house or its. With the only evidence of my experience being my extensive injuries and significant liver damage, I chose to explain those as having been acquired through a lengthy bender, and having lived on the streets for the few months that I'd been missing. Even considering an attempt to explain the truth of what had happened to me filled me with terror, guilt, and shame. I convinced myself that no good could come from it. Barely alive, the first 2 weeks after my return were spent in a hospital being pumped with nutrients and receiving several considerable surgeries to begin to correct some of the damage to my body. And luckily, with several months of treatment and a few more surgeries, my prognosis for a full recovery was good. It was not until my return from the initial stay in the hospital that I first opened my door again, which, bringing with it a powerful wave of relief, revealed behind it my living room, just as I'd left it those months before. Upon entering, the first thing that I did was dump out the remnants of the whiskey I'd purchased on the night I'd relapsed, the only glimmer of positivity from the whole experience being that it strengthened the resolve in my sobriety. I told myself that I would never touch another drop, that I would live the rest of my life trying to help other addicts reach recovery, that I would keep as many away from the winter house that I could, as I know it's still out there. I know it's just on the other side of the door waiting for me. It knows I have my moments of weakness. It knows I suffer, and it hungers for my return. I'm writing this now to remind myself of the horrors it put me through. I'm writing it so that I never forget the torment I endured at its hands, because its temptations are difficult to resist. For the last several nights, when I've laid my head down to sleep, I've been greeted with the sound of tinkling in a glass. The invitation rests beside me, waiting for me to accept it. I'm flooded with the memory of euphoria it contains, and the unbridled ecstasy I could experience once again. A familiar, chill air sweeps through the room, and Sherry's whispers meet my ears. Oh, baby, I've missed you. It's okay. Just take it. Come back home.